Hi, and welcome to the Video Club Spotlight number 3. This is where we spotlight or highlight the creative talents of one or more of our club members. The first film I'm going to show is by Tom Nash. He's one of the highlights and driving forces behind our club. Here's his travel film, Surprising Churches of Cairo.
Hi, I'm Tom Nash. A few years ago I got to go to Cairo with some folks from my church, and we did all the usual things that you do in Cairo. We saw the pyramids, we rode camels, we had dinner on the Nile, but probably the most surprising thing we saw were the churches. Churches in Egypt? After all, it's an Islamic nation and mosques are everywhere. But did you realize that until it was conquered by Islam in the 7th century, Egypt was an important center of Christianity? The church has existed there since it was planted in the 1st century by Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark. Today, about 10% of the population are Christian. So, it's not surprising that there are a number of old historic churches like this famous and beautiful hanging church. More surprising is the location of this church just off Tahrir Square, the center of Egypt's government. Qasr el-Dabara Evangelical Church, with 7,000 members, was planted by Presbyterian missionaries over a century ago. Their outreach program is mind-boggling. For example, they operate this enormous sports complex. They have sports camps all summer for both Christian and Islamic kids, recruiting coaches from Europe and the United States. Their pastor, Dr. Sama Maurice, was a well-known surgeon before he decided his time was better spent as a pastor. But he is no doubt the reason why the church also has a hospital. Qasr el-Dabara is also a partner in a remarkable television service, Sat7, with 15 million viewers throughout the Arabic-speaking world. However, you haven't seen the most surprising church yet. To get to the famous cave church, you literally have to go to the dumps, the city dump. Because of extreme prejudice against Christians, many of them found the only safe place they could live was actually in the dump. And so they made the best of it. Today, this entire community makes a meager living by sorting garbage, which they pick up all over the city using pickups and even donkey carts. They sell what can be recycled, feed the food scraps to their herds of pigs. The smell is unbelievable. We quickly rolled up our car windows as we drove through. Well, eventually you get through the dump and you come to this amazing complex. Here, the local residents have taken advantage of natural caves in the cliff to build a huge church. This amphitheater seats 5,000 people. A second cave in the same location contains these beautiful inscriptions carved into the walls. Truly, Cairo is a city of surprises, not the least of which are its churches.
Our next film was produced by one of our most active members, Lucy Parker. This film demonstrates that you can sometimes use personal relationships to generate a very interesting film. Her film is titled Little Things.
Too often, we rush past little things. My friend Jenny Robertson not only notices them, she likes to create them. Small surprises tucked in every corner. And then there's Tom, who builds the frame she decorates. Here's a picture I once took of Tom, and here's another. The retired math professor balancing their equation. This summer, I went to visit my old friends and tried to capture what I always rediscover at their home, a place where whales swim by and otters play, where, with the years, with friendship, with memories, tiny things come to be savored and understood. Ginny's a retired school librarian, and she's still at it, supplying the neighborhood with books. But the little book box is just one of many gentle grace notes at 35 Yankee Point.
Across the morning sky, all the birds are leaving. Ah, how can they know it's time for them to go? Before the winter fire will still be dreaming. I do not count the time. Who knows where the time goes? Who knows where the time goes?
For many years, I heard stories about how tourists were able to visit Churchill, Canada, and watch polar bears. But you had to make reservations at least a year in advance, and that was too much for me. So this is a little story about how I succeeded eventually in seeing polar bears up close and personal. Well, you'll never guess where I am. I'm in Winnipeg, Canada, which is about, I suppose, 200 miles north of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm here at a sort of a side part of the the Winnipeg airport, waiting for a charter plane, which is going to fly me 2 hours north. To help orient you, here is a map of the United States. Here is Canada, here is Hudson Bay, and here is Churchill. Now, the distance covered by my charter flight is going to be about the same as between Chicago and New York City. We're going 2 hours north to Churchill, Canada, the idea of seeing polar bears. About 10 10 days ago, I got a telephone call. I put my name in on a waiting list to be able to have a tour up to Churchill and see the polar bears. And all of a sudden I got this call. So I've been trying to get ready, and I've been talking to people. And on the plane coming into Winnipeg, I talked to some people who live here, and everybody has said no one has seen polar bears yet this year. Well, the lady who met the group here in town today told me that every group that's been up here, the last 4 groups, have all seen plenty of polar bears. So I'm really looking forward to what's going to be happening. And so this trip, which has been a little bit rushed, is going to work out okay. So if you'll stick with me, I'll show you what's going to happen. We were picked up at the Churchill airport and taken to our lodging on the outskirts of Churchill. There were 24 of us. We had most of our meals at the lodge in their rustic cafe. And we could step outside at night and see the northern lights, if the sky was clear. This town has its own sense of humor. The next morning, we were driven out into the tundra, where we boarded a special vehicle, a tundra buggy. It had seats and was heated on the inside. It had a bathroom inside. It was high off the ground and had big tires. It had a back porch where you could stand outside in the cold. The first thing we were told was to look for polar bears in this barren landscape. The more people looking, the better the chance of seeing them. We were told that bears tended to lie down beside low willows where they rest, and they're very hard to spot. Can you see the polar bear in this scene? Oh, there's the polar bear. Well, now that you're getting a little experience, I suppose you can spot the polar bear in this picture. Everybody was happy when the polar bear began to move about. The polar bear is the largest carnivore in the world. This one does look cuddly, but make no mistake. Head for cover if you meet him on the street. The polar bears we saw seem to relax a lot. That's because they don't have any food right now. They're hungry, and they have to conserve their energy. The polar bear uses his very sensitive nose to identify his surroundings.
He has his nose up in the air. Yeah, checking things out.
I was really impressed by how flexible the polar bear is.
filling out. Yeah. Well, there's the Garfield.
Polar bears seem to be quite curious. A bit later on in this video, I'll explain the life cycle of a polar bear and explain why they happen to congregate near Churchill just as winter is setting in. But first, I'll show you a few of the other things we saw on our tour. We were given a tour of the town of Churchill. Churchill is really isolated in Canada. There are no roads into Churchill. There are 0 roads into Churchill. The only way to get here, or to bring things into Churchill, is by train or airplane, period. Our primary guide was Judd, who lives here year-round.
The main drag here, this is downtown. This is Kelsey Boulevard. But I also like to point out here on the main drag, there's no traffic lights. You may have noticed there's no Starbucks or Tim Hortons or Walmarts. We're what, a town of 800 people here in the wintertime. And carrying on down Kelsey, you'll see the big blue box store, the Northern, the grocery store. It's a grocery store. So it was supposed to pay or subsidize, you know, all the groceries. So the milk price went down to $5.25 like the rest of Canada pays. But then mysteriously I noticed all the vegetables went up. They were already expensive. I've seen one cucumber at $6, or a head of romaine lettuce at $9.
Oh my God.
Anybody notice what the gas station is?
No. Yeah. Just saying.
One lone pump. That's it. It's great. I love it.
What are you doing?
Yeah. So sometimes what people do, if they're going to do a big grocery run, like at Christmas time especially, they'll take the train to Thompson, spend 5 hours in Thompson, and then take the train back.
Wow.
So yeah, it's always a bit of a...
Different life.
It is, yeah. It slows things down. The church sales or rummage sales when people are moving, you know, if it's at 1 o'clock, people are like vultures.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and all the good stuff's gone in the first 5 minutes. Because there is no dollar store, there's no Walmart, so if you have kids growing...
There are a few points of special interest near the town of Churchill. This is an old fortification. Over much of the tundra, we walked on a special boardwalk to get to the other of the town's tourist sites. In the tourist season, there are special guards who watch for polar bears that might come near unprotected tourist sites, like this one.
So that's why we're hyper vigilant, and you'll notice there's a phone number there, 675-BEAR. If at any time a local notices a bear in town, close to town, out there it's fine. But now if he's come, they have it's all zonage. If they come within a certain zone, well then it's time to action the bear. And when I mean action, quite simply, I mean even though I have my shotgun here, I carry cracker shells. So I have live ammunition, but that's the last resort. There is no hunting of polar bears in Manitoba. So if for some reason you shoot a bear in Manitoba, you're going to have a mountain of paperwork to justify why you had to shoot that bear, and you are absolutely not allowed to keep any parts of that bear.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So it would be, at that point, a purely self-defense maneuver, and that's assuming all the other things that you can do didn't work. So to be honest, most of the time I have a rock in the back of the crawler, and a couple taps of the rock on a shovel is enough to chase a bear along if he's being too aggressive with the machine.
Bears can be very dangerous to humans. Now, this land looks barren and uninteresting to the casual observer, yet very low down, next to the ground, grow several species of colorful plants and lichen.
And it's very slow growing. It's only a few millimeters a year. So when you see these huge patches of it, it's very old.
There are various colors of lichen growing here. In warmer seasons, there are tiny flowers in bloom.
So you can see in this small little patch how many flowers there are. So it's really a completely different landscape. So the tundra is constantly changing colors. You go through a wave of purple flowers and white flowers and yellow flowers, and then in the fall, the blood reds and the bright yellows. But everything's only this high. So it's very gorgeous here, I think. Yeah.
As we roamed over the tundra looking for polar bears, we didn't really see much else that was moving. But we did spot one other omnivore, a red fox. The fox has a highly varied diet, but primarily lives off of small rodents like voles and mice. It will eat waterfowl and some plant material like berries. This fox seems to be eating something that's frozen.
He looks quite happy there, doesn't he?
The fox can be territorial, and it marks its territory with urine. Notice that the fox has this long, bushy tail with a white spot at the end of the tail.
I've seen Arctic fox curled up in a tiny ball with their big furry tail, you know, because they're in a ball and it's wrapped around their head, and they just bury their muzzle in there.
The red fox seems to be on the move all the time. A fox generally stays with a mate, and you can see that there are two foxes here. The fox has excellent hearing, and it hunts primarily by using its eyes, which detect motion. When it gathers more food than it needs, then it'll store the excess in a cache, which it comes back and uses later. The red fox is found below the polar circle and in many, many parts of the world. It does not hibernate. We were served lunch on board our tundra crawler. Lunch included soup and sandwiches. An interesting feature of our little group of 24 people was that 6 of them were from France. And for all practical purposes, they only understood French. Now, Canada is a bilingual country, and our guide repeated most of what she said in English, again in the French language.
Ça c'est bœuf fromage ou jambon fromage, ou bien des trucs poulet. C'est tellement difficile à donner un point de repère, justement. Bon, le point blanc à côté du truc blanc, c'est pas évident. Mais l'année dernière, ça formait. Mais tout à coup, le vent a changé de direction. Il y avait une journée ou deux de température à remonter.
Now I'd like to talk about why polar bears congregate near the town of Churchill every year in late September and then into October. The key to understanding this behavior is that the polar bear's primary diet is the seal. A polar bear can swim, but not as fast as a seal. So how does a polar bear catch a seal? The trick is to wait until the water freezes over. The seal has to come up to breathe, and so the seal creates holes, breathing holes, in the sea ice as it forms, and then maintains these dozen or so breathing holes throughout the winter. It does this so it has a place to surface and get its next breath of air. So the polar bear finds a breathing hole and then just waits, sometimes for hours and hours, for a seal to arrive and breathe. When the bear smells the air bubbles, he tries to grab the seal, kill, and eat it. Now, when the sea ice melts in Hudson Bay, the polar bears no longer have a source of the food they crave, and they retreat to land, and they conserve their energy, and they get hungry. The polar bear does not hibernate. By the time the sea ice forms again in Hudson Bay, the polar bear has been without food for months. It is a very hungry bear. So, why do polar bears congregate near Churchill? The answer is that on Hudson Bay, the sea ice forms first near the town of Churchill, not farther north. The bears are hungry. They can only feed where there is sea ice, so they congregate near Churchill to take advantage of the first sea ice that's formed. Some bears arrive early in September. As soon as the sea ice has formed, certainly by the end of October, the polar bears are gone, out on the ice. So, Churchill, as isolated as it is, has a big tourist industry of polar bear watching, but only for about 6 or 7 weeks a year. All in all, my trip to see polar bears in Churchill turned out very well. Well, that concludes the films we are going to show in the Video Club Spotlight number 3. Stay healthy, wash your hands, keep a safe social distance, and wear a face mask so we can meet again next time.